Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Meow Tavern. And today we're going to be diving into the world of the Rose of Versailles. The Rose of Versailles, also known as Lady Oscar, or its Japanese name, Versailles no Bara, or some people call it Bara Beru, is an animated series from the 1970s by Ryoko Ikeda. Yes, the same author as Dear Brother. It's not that over the top though. The Lady Oscar is nowhere near as over the top as Dear Brother was. So, yeah, this anime follows fictional character named Oscar in the setting of pre-French Revolution and during the French Revolution. I went into the series mostly blind, the same way as I did with Dear Brother. It's the same as Dear Brother where there's just so much going on. And especially since this is trying to stay a little bit more accurate to the French Revolution timeline. Of course, Oscar is a fictional character, just to reiterate that. But yeah, there's a lot of cool things that happen in really funny ways, which I mean, I'm not complaining. Apparently, some of these really goofy things happened in real life. So it tries to stay accurate to what actually happened in France. The first arc is the Dewberry versus Marie Antoinette arc. The first episode starts with a scene of a beautiful baby girl being born to a noble family. The father, General Gergis, of the infant is horrified at the idea of another daughter being born to the family and takes hold of her, declaring her to be his son, Oscar. Thus begins the story of Lady Oscar, a woman disguised as a man for the sake of military control and power for the family of Gergis. Some time has passed and Oscar is now 14. We're introduced to Andre, a servant boy that she's sparring with. After her spar session, Oscar is presented with the opportunity to become the commander of the Royal Guard. Her duties would revolve around watching over Marie Antoinette, but she declines it since she doesn't want to be stuck babysitting. This is so goofy. It kind of reminded me of rape. So her father insists for, Oscar to attend a match in the afternoon to fight for the opportunity to become the commander of the Royal Guard. And instead of fighting in front of a large audience, Oscar offers to duel her opponent in private so she doesn't have to humiliate him in front of everybody. She doesn't want to, make him feel bad for getting his ass handed to him by a woman. So they spar in private. And once Oscar defeats the general Girardelli, she is recommended as the commander of the Royal Guard by him. And she accepts the role after talking about it with her friend Andre. By talking, I mean they throw punches at each other. It's quite ridiculous, and it got a quick laugh out of me. Anyway, she accepts the offer, and she is in her military uniform by the end of the episode. From the get-go, the topic of Oscar and womanhood is brought up, and how she feels as if she has to leave behind her womanhood and has to continue living on as a man. She wants to because she's been expected to by her father. It's like a heavy topic that constantly weighs on Oscar's mind. Oscar has identity issues of whether to be and live as a man, like her father wants her to, or a small side of her wants to experience things that other girls experience. She doesn't really wear dresses. She's more of a tomboy. Not really. Not a tomboy. She's straight up mimicking being a man, so living as a man. So she's conflicted about her life, and Andre tries to kind of be like, hey man, you don't have to live as a man. You can run away from all of this and just choose to be a woman, but she's like, no, man. In episode 2, Oscar is pissed off to learn that her first mission is to play as a body double for Marie Antoinette. Heck no is she doing that. Marie is just doing her royalty shit, and we already know what'll happen to her if this anime stays historically accurate, right? But basically, Marie is moving to France. She'll be wed to Louis XVI. Her mom kind of roasts her at first, but then also hands her some of the family heirlooms before sending her off to head towards France. Meanwhile, Oscar is doing Royal Guard shit for Marie's arrival. Securing the perimeter. The imposter's name is Jean. I think Jean. She disguises herself as Marie since this is all a part of one of the Duke's plans to embarrass the king and to have him dethroned, Duke Orleans. And he's constantly trying to, the first half, I would say from episodes 1 to 11, he's constantly trying to take over the throne and he's constantly plotting against Louis XVI in particular. Once Marie arrives, she finds out that she's expected to give up everything she's brought from home, including her heirlooms that her mother gave her. Upon hearing this, Marie runs away. She doesn't want to get married anymore. She hides from her handmaidens and gets lured away by Jean, who convinces her to trade dresses with Marie so the two can swap spots. The real Marie ends up running away outside from the venue, which luckily Oscar spots. Marie's just senselessly running and runs into a cave. Unfortunately for her, the bad guys are there and attempt to kill Marie, but Oscar, being the amazing lead that she is, kicks some ass. Oscar is unable to extract information from the henchman and rushes to the royal palace with the real Marie. Before the imposter is able to make her escape and get away from this mess, the Duke kills her, cloaking his involvement with the entire plot. Marie gets to meet her future husband and is hella disappointed. He gives her an awkward kiss on the cheek and she's super bummed by him. Must suck to marry someone you don't even like. But then again, she's like 14 as well, so sucks that she had to even get married in the first place. In episode 3, Louis and Antoinette sign their marriage contracts and everybody loses their mind over a little bit of ink spilling on the paper. Oscar's popularity grows after the previous episode. Ladies whisper when she passes by them in the halls, and Antoinette has to address everyone in the royal court since she's finally wed to the Crown Prince. She's absolutely loving the endless compliments flowing her way. Since Louis doesn't know how to dance, Antoinette takes the floor hoping to dance with Oscar. While approaching Oscar, she finds herself making nasty eye contact with another lady, Madame du Barry, the king's mistress. Once she finds out that Madame du Barry was a prostitute, she ignores her like the plague. On top of that, she hates that du Barry is a commoner. Not to mention, these 3 old grandmas fill her head with even more gossip. Du Barry calls Antoinette a redhead because she's not blonde enough, and the cat fight till episode 10 begins. Du Barry and Antoinette have a standoff for everyone's affection. The news of Antoinette ignoring Du Barry just spreads like wildfire and everybody starts taking sides. Du Barry can't talk to Antoinette till she speaks to her first because of their court rules, and Antoinette keeps ignoring Du Barry for like 3 whole months. And like, girl, you'll start war with Austria and France. Like, what are you doing? She does not give a shit. She's just a kid. She's just here to be snobby. During all this turmoil, Oscar stays neutral, but her family receives an invitation from Du Barry to request Oscar's mother to be her lady-in-waiting. Oscar is furious and hates that her mother is being involved in the quarrel between these 2 spoiled nobles, especially after the king orders her mother to pick one, because Antoinette also ends up eventually sending an invitation to Oscar's mother to be her lady-in-waiting. Oscar's mother ends up picking Antoinette. So Oscar follows Antoinette around to make sure that she doesn't harm her mother in any way, which is so sweet, and I respect her for that. But that's also how the 2 end up getting close, since Oscar is always sticking around her. Oscar was going to stick around her anyway because she's her royal guard, but now she has to actually babysit her by being super close to her. Like I mentioned earlier, another thing that reoccurs a lot from episodes 1 to 10 is Duke Orleans constantly trying to plot against Louis the 16th and constantly trying to get him killed. And he ends up teaming up with Du Barry. Really, some of the strategies were really smart, but it ends up backfiring. Also, I can't really hate Du Barry because she's a commoner who found a way to get to the top. You made that happen. So in episode 4, Du Barry gets upset that Antoinette keeps ignoring her, right? And Duke Orleans approaches her with a poison and tells her that she can use it however she sees fit. So Du Barry gets to scheming, and she invites Lady Jarges over to her room, hoping to frame her and Antoinette for attempted poisoning. But Andre happens to notice Oscar's mother entering Lady Du Barry's room and lets Oscar know immediately that something might be up. Oscar, after hearing this news, rushes over to her mom's side and saves her mom. In episode 5, the Duke rigs the prince's gun so it would explode when he's shot from it. But that backfires as well, since while hunting out for foxes, Oscar steals the prince's kill during the first time, and the second time, Louis gets scared of the fox and drops his gun, which explodes on the ground. Marie continues being a brat, and no surprise there, right? But she asks for Oscar's opinion on the whole talking to Dewberry matter, and Oscar tells her that she's being petty, and that this whole thing is super petty, which might result in an actual war between the countries, and that it will be better to just talk to Dewberry to avoid getting thousands of people involved in a stupid war and having them lose their lives. So, listening to Oscar, Marie attempts to talk to Dewberry at the party, because they always have parties. There's constant parties. They attend parties every afternoon. They got nothing better to do. They ain't working, so they're just taxing the poor. But yeah, they attend a party. And during this party, like I said, Marie attempts to talk to Dewberry, but her three aunts get in the way and they just snatch her away, making sure that Marie doesn't get to talk to Dewberry at all due to their own personal beef with Dewberry. Everyone in the hall kind of starts chattering and laughing, which embarrasses and enrages Dewberry even more. So on New Year's Day, the very next day, Antoinette finally talks to Dewberry. Dewberry breaks into a comical laugh that results in Antoinette running away, telling Oscar that she'll never speak to her ever again. From this point, she earns Oscar's respect. But I just couldn't stop laughing at how petty all of this was. Starting episode 6, we get more in touch with the lives of regular people a bit. People in Paris are truly suffering. Hunger floods the many impoverished folks struggling to get by daily. Even a piece of bread was difficult to get, the complete opposite of the lives that the nobles lived. A commoner girl named Jean, and she's daydreaming about the day she gets to live as a princess in Versailles. Not wanting to work, she runs away from home. Rosalie, her sister, stays with her mother and comforts her mother. Why did I mention them? They become important a little later. But another assassination plot is conjured up, but fails thanks to Oscar. She catches the assassin and they spar. He ends up losing, but not wanting to answer any of her questions, he takes the poison and ends his own life, taking his secrets with him. Jean is tossing stones in the river when she sees a rich person's coach passing by and begs them for some money or help, and ends up lying about her mother being dead and all, and how she's from the noble family of Valois. The ploy works as she catches a ride with this lady who wants to know all about her, since she's well aware of her Valois lineage. A Swedish noble around this time is also introduced, known as Fersen, who gets involved with Marie Antoinette. She's lonely and she feels neglected by the prince, who is obsessed with making locks. Cool hobby, I guess, but he hands her a heart-shaped lock and runs away. Lil Antoinette gets acquainted with Fersen, who is infatuated by her beauty. Oscar lets Fersen know that the lady that he's flirting with is the princess, and so he backs off and the two clearly, start having a thing for each other. Once Dewberry catches a sight of this, she starts plotting, and she's like, let's make some scandal. Let's make a scandalous little love letter from Fersen to Marie. Let's cause some drama. Oscar, on the other hand, is worried that Marie is getting a little too emotionally involved with Fersen, and that she is being a little too open about her feelings for Fersen, because she's a married woman. She can't be like mingling like that. Rumors will spread. It's really bad for her rep. They're trying to get her to have a good reputation with her people, and this might not help, right? And it might not help with the other nobles as well. They might all start laughing at her and looking down on her. Dewberry ends up having a love letter, like I was saying, forged between Fersen and Antoinette. A couple of maids are passing by down the hall, and Dewberry's plan is to just drop down the letter and have one of those ladies pick it up, and the gossip would spread like wildfire, right? But unfortunately for her, Oscar's mom ends up finding the letter and ends up handing it to Oscar. Oscar, after getting the letter, ends up going to Fersen, confronting him about this letter. She ends up finding out that actually Fersen isn't the one who wrote the letter and that it might have been forged. And so, to sleuthing she goes. She got to figure out who is this and who's behind this whole defamation brigade, right? As she's trying to find the real culprit behind this whole ordeal, Dewberry ends up killing everyone involved in the entire matter so that no one can tie it back to her. Despite not having concrete evidence, Oscar walks up to her and warns her then walks off. One day, after seeing Dewberry ride a horse, Antoinette decides that she also wants to learn that skill. And so Andre ends up taking on the task of teaching Antoinette how to ride the horse. But unfortunately, there's an accident. So basically, they were barely done giving her instructions on how to ride the horse when she ended up being way too loud and almost died, dragging poor Andre. So, yeah. I would say Andre was more likely to die than Antoinette, but whatever. In the process of saving Antoinette, Oscar ends up getting impaled with a branch. The king ends up getting super furious at this whole ordeal and wants Andre arrested and even executed. I had a feeling when I saw Andre being dragged by Antoinette while the horse was running wild that they would either kill the horse or blame someone else for Antoinette's mistakes. So this part wasn't a surprise at all. So they hold a trial for Andre, and Oscar runs in, tries to take full responsibility for Andre's actions, and requests a proper trial, and she bids her own life on the line. Since Andre is her family's servant, right? Ferguson vouches for her and makes the same request, gaining Oscar's respect in the process, since she's admiring his sense of justice. And maybe there's more to it, who knows? Antoinette barges in and begs for all of them to be forgiven and kisses the king's ass, saying he's so merciful, please forgive them. And so he eats up all of that and is like, you're right, and lets them all go. Oscar's injuries finally catch up to her and she faints at the trial. She's taken back to the family manor, right? And Fearson, all this time, had no idea that Oscar was a woman. He's totally impressed by her strength. Oscar's a thug. She wakes up all perfectly fine. Well, she's not perfectly fine. She's still recovering from her injuries, but around this time, because Oscar put her life in the line and was willing to take on a severe punishment on Andre's behalf, he decides that he's willing to dedicate his entire life to protect her. And he's ultimately in love with her. In episode 9, the king catches smallpox, and the doctors are predicting that the king won't make it. Madame Dewberry, who's paranoid about her lack of power if the king dies, tries to get Oscar to convince Antoinette to forgive her, but Oscar doesn't budge. Duke Orleans refuses to help her because she's not worth anything if the king dies. So, goodbye, out of my way, peasant. The king bans Dewberry from Versailles since he is dying and wants to receive religious absolution. So, Dewberry's getting kicked out, and a soldier tries beating her, but Oscar intervenes and escorts her out of the palace for her own safety. Along the way, Dewberry shares her story with Oscar, and we get to learn how she, basically hustled her way to the top. She's envious of Oscar, who doesn't have to worry about tomorrow's meal and how much bread is going to cost now. Dewberry in 1797, during the revolution, she gets executed. The king dies, and now Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette become king and queen. Oscar, around this time, starts getting a little bit more uneasy and can tell that maybe something was changing. She could feel the change in the air. She's worried more than ever before about the tough times that are coming up ahead. Episode 10 is where some of the French Revolution stuff starts trickling in, starting with the king and the queen being crowned, right? And Maximilien Robespierre, the future leader of the French Revolution, yes, him, the motherfucker who eventually gets guillotined as well, yes, him, is introduced, and he delivers the kings and queens' congratulation speech. Meanwhile, Rosalie is walking when a coach almost runs her over, and she notices that her sister, Jeanne, is in it. She follows her all the way to her new residence, curious about her new living situation and confused by her new status in life, but also just to catch up with her sister. She genuinely did not know where her sister went. Rosalie ends up getting fired from her job due to the depression hitting France, right? And so she turns to her sister, who's living this lavish life, for a little bit of help. And instead of helping her sister, convinces a man who's in love with her, Nicholas, to kill her little sister for her. Girl, why? There is a depression going on. People are starving. Just give your sister some money for bread and send her away. You don't have to kill her. But yeah, the guy beats the shit out of Rosalie and kicks her out. No one is hiring, and Rosalie is getting desperate by the minute to get a job. It gets to the point where she tries prostituting herself just to be able to afford bread. The first coach that she attempts that to just happens to belong to Oscar. Oscar is definitely not the type of person to buy a prostitute, right? So she lets Oscar know about her financial situation, and Oscar ends up handing her 1 gold livre. This interaction deeply troubles Oscar. She's concerned at the state of the country, especially now that she's come across such a young girl trying to sell herself off for money to be able to afford food and medicine. Jean and Nicholas burn the mansion and kill the woman who took her in, and then they forge her signature on the will so they can get everything. Episode 11. Antoinette is finally the queen, but she's still too immature since she keeps dismissing important meetings with other nobles to go hang out with her friends and doing whatever she pleases without a care in the world, feeling free and happy. She isn't paying attention to the state of France either. She also grants Oscar a promotion to High Commander, which results in her possibly gaining higher pension and pay. But Oscar, being the more observant and studious individual, declines the higher pay due to her worries of the financial state of France. Around this time, Marie's popularity with the people is starting to decline, mainly around nobles, due to her favoritism towards certain folks, that for certain folk being Fersen. So Antoinette is constantly yearning for Fersen. She ends up always canceling her audience with other nobles and cancels concerts or whatever that's going on in the palace just so she can hang out with Fersen, which ends up getting people very frustrated and irritated and grumpy because she is just not doing her queenly duties. So she isn't free to just hang around and do whatever she wants anymore. Now that she's queen, there are certain duties that she has to follow through with, which she isn't doing. So Oscar makes a visit to Fersen and warns him to leave France for Sweden immediately. This sets him on edge, but he understands why. Before Oscar leaves, Fersen asks her if she ever has felt lonely since she hasn't gotten a chance to live life as a woman, to which Oscar expresses her contentment with her life. On the drive back, Oscar and Andre observe a little boy who gets in trouble for stealing money to buy food due to the crisis hitting the streets of France. Taxed to shit and left to starve. The Duke lies about forgiving the boy and shoots him from the back, murdering him in the open in front of everyone. This rightfully angers Oscar, who wants to chase down the Duke, but Andre gets in the way and stops her. To hell with nobility, Oscar says, as she cries in private over the whole ordeal. This is the beginning of some form of change in Oscar, her slow resentment towards nobility. The word of Fersen leaving the country reaches Antoinette, leaving her lonely once again. That's great and all, but what about the kid that got shot in the back for stealing money for food? Like, Mans really said, fuck them kids. He laughs at the face of child hunger. Oscar still can't control the rage towards the Duke gunning kids down whenever she passes by him. She's out for blood, and I can't wait for when shit hits the fan. Antoinette continues overindulging in extravagant luxuries, drowning in entertainment and parties, ignoring her share of the royal duties. During a dinner with the royals, Oscar and Duke gun him kids down, gets into an argument. Oscar calls him out on killing the kid, and the Duke calls her out on just being a woman. The Duke ends up challenging to her duel, and Oscar accepts. It's showtime. The two Dukes plot a way to win the duel by placing Oscar at a disadvantaged spot, a spot that would blind Oscar due to the reflection of the sun from a nearby cathedral. On the day of the duel, the sight of the child's murder weighs on Oscar's mind. She will avenge the poor child. Oscar notices the light coming from behind her and blocks the Duke's shot by putting the gun to her face to avoid the reflection of the light, and makes her shot right after, shooting his hand and sparing his life. Antoinette arrives on scene and orders Oscar to be placed under disciplinary confinement for a month. Basically house arrest, with a whole lot of freedom. Oscar ignores her confinement request and heads out with Andre to the village of Addis. On their way to the village, Oscar makes a conversation with an old acquaintance and notices their lack of friendliness. At the inn, Oscar meets Robespierre. Through Robespierre, Oscar learns about how tough things truly are for the average French citizen. The little kid that they came across earlier, who was with that old acquaintance, had fallen ill, and his family couldn't afford his treatment, so Oscar takes it upon herself to take the family to the hospital and pay for the expenses. The whole thing just leaves her more in despair than ever before. She's starting to see the fall of her country and the death of innocent folks. She's mad at being this ignorant. They're returning home, riding their horses, and Oscar is still frustrated by all this information. Andre makes some excuse about the king and queen being kind-hearted folks, but this doesn't sway Oscar's frustration. She ends up losing control of her horse and ends up knocking herself out. Meanwhile, at the palace, Antoinette is being manipulated by Countess Polignac into gaining titles, wealth, and status. Antoinette promises her new jobs and the salaries of her servants to be paid by the country. Bro, Antoinette is sucking the 99% of her people dry through taxes. Bitch, like, the fuck? Don't promise bullshit like that. Oscar reports to her father about everything that she's learned so far, but he pulls a Kaoru and slaps the goofy out of Goofy out of Oscar. Rosalie is able to get a job at the dressmaker shop. Unfortunately for her, her mother gets run over by a carriage belonging to Polignac. Her mother dies, and so Rosalie swears to get her revenge. But before her mother completely is dead, she drops a bombshell that Rosalie's real mother is a noble named Gabrielle Martin, and that's all that she was able to say before she dies. Also, good on this random stranger for demanding the noble to apologize before she was able to get away. This noble stranger is actually Bernard, a journalist for the Paris newspaper, and somebody who ends up joining forces in the revolution later. When Rosalie arrives at the Versailles manor, she ends up mistaking Oscar's mom as Polignac and attempts to stab her, but Oscar intervenes. She gives this familiar face a chance to share her story. I guess Rosalie didn't realize that palace is gigantic and that there are other nobles living nearby as well, so she really had no idea where she was going and what she was actually gonna 100% do, other than stab somebody. Oscar decides that she's gonna take her in and teach her how to use the sword and possibly help her with her revenge. Oscar's disciplinary confinement is over and she's back on duty. Polignac gets a bunch of nobles, including Antoinette, into gambling. Duke Orleans and Duke Gumenin, this other duke is gunning kids down. So they start rumors about Antoinette and place a pressure on her being heirless, forcing her to possibly try and conceive a child. Polignac persuades Antoinette into lying about being pregnant. This news spreads like wildfire, and everyone starts sending their gifts to Marie, which is stupid because this bitch is rich. Like, she doesn't need gifts. It's like when people give celebrities expensive shit that they can already buy for themselves. Oscar confronts Polignac about the fixed gambling matches and Antoinette's addiction, but she can't act on it since it'll further tarnish Antoinette's reputation. Antoinette ends up getting into some big debt, which is roughly 55 million US dollars. The jig is up, but to avoid any form of punishment, Polignac sheds crocodile tears and Antoinette falls for it. Lady Oscar requests that Antoinette quit gambling by drawing her sword and swearing it on her life. Antoinette lets her know that she's already quit, and Polignac starts plotting after seeing all of that and sends out an announcement that the queen had had a miscarriage because Oscar drew her sword in front of her. There are these sapphic moments between these two, and I was like, ooh, but no. It's one-sided. Rosalie does some down bad shit like dancing with this headless mannequin with Oscar's uniform. She starts fantasizing about Oscar, which is kind of embarrassing because Oscar walks in on her, questioning her why she was in her room. Before Rosalie can run away, Oscar invites her to a ball and plans to introduce her as her distant relative. This will be a great opportunity to uncover Rosalie's mother's killer. Meanwhile, Jean and Nicholas pose as Count and Countess to con money from the ball's hostess. Oscar and Rosalie make a grand entrance, all eyes on them. Oscar's fangirls are screaming as she holds Rosalie's hand. Unfortunately for Rosalie, the woman that she's looking for isn't at the ball. Charlotte, one of the guests, ends up getting envious of Rosalie's popularity and how so many people are gathering around her and decides to embarrass her in front of everybody. Rosalie puts up a fight before running away from the ballroom. Antoinette wants to meet Oscar's rumored relative. Rosalie is hesitant to meet Antoinette since she believes Antoinette is the reason why so many people in France are suffering. Rosalie finally finds her mother's killer. Polignac also recognizes Rosalie from the incident. Rage fuels Rosalie, and she's about to pull out her knife and stab her, but Oscar stops her. Later that night, Oscar talks some sense into Rosalie to be smarter about her revenge and to value her life a little bit more. Andre and Oscar also offer to find her biological mother. Polignac sends assassins in the middle of the night after Oscar's carriage. A mini fight ensues. Andre is holding a few off, and so is Oscar when one of the assassins makes their way to Rosalie. Oscar gets injured while trying to protect Rosalie, but Fearson arrives just before the finishing blow. Oscar is taken back to the manor to recover and correctly suspects Polignac as the mastermind behind the plot. It's been 4 years at this point since Fearson has been gone, and I didn't realize that since it was just a few episodes where he was told to fuck off. But yeah, there's a time skip. Marie is overjoyed upon hearing Fearson return. It's been years and her love for him hasn't wavered much. But there might be trouble in paradise since Fearson tells Oscar that he came to France for business, but mainly due to his father's request to help him find a wife, which completely breaks Marie. Like, ma'am, aren't you already married? Let this man free. He can't be your side hoe forever. You know, as the royalty do, they're going to a ball, a party, and there's a party, and Antoinette is late for that particular concert party thing happening and hosted by somebody, and accidentally meets Fearson in the woods, and things get spicy between the two. Okay, so Polignac gets a little bit more disgusting. I didn't realize this, but Charlotte is legit 11 years old, and her mom has agreed to get her married off to this old ass guy. And the news just shocks little Charlotte to her core, and she faints. Meanwhile, Andre finds out Rosalie's birth mother is actually Polignac, who had changed her name. What a plot twist. So now what? Does Rosalie continue with her revenge? Fuck yeah, because Rosalie does not give a damn about this woman because this woman did not raise her. Her other mother did, and she loves her foster mother more and wants revenge for her foster mother. Oscar discourages Rosalie from going through with her revenge and was hoping that with time, her passion would disappear. Rosalie follows Polignac to a party hosted by that old fart, right, and attacks her carriage, but is unable to bring herself to shoot her. She could have just pulled the trigger. It would have been easy to cover her tracks back then, but she isn't cruel like her biological mother. Oscar shows up and comforts Rosalie and is proud of her not going through with it. She also spills the tea to Polignac that Rosalie is her daughter. Sad plot incoming, okay? But later at that same ball, the old fart, the Duke, drags Charlotte to a separate room and forcefully kisses Charlotte's hand. Her mother clearly won't protect her, and it troubles her soul to the point where this little baby commits suicide by jumping off a tower. The only one I felt bad for. Anyway, Fearson and Marie end up spending nights together, many nights together. Slowly, rumors start flooding the streets about these two. There's gossip and tabloid people making fun of Marie and just, yeah, her reputation down the drain. Oscar feels helpless in this situation since Marie is intensely in love with Fearson. So there's another ball happening, and at that ball, Oscar arrives in her uniform and requests a dance with Marie and to be her only dancing partner throughout the whole night, preventing Fearson from dancing with her, doing her best to keep Marie's dying reputation up. Later, Fearson thanks Oscar for all her help and promises to leave for France and never come back. He is heading to fight the war in USA, baby. Oscar doesn't want to see him off and cries as she secretly begs him not to die. She is too heartbroken by his departure, and I don't know, maybe kinda could be she has a thing for him now. Episode 21, in my opinion, is the beginning of the Diamond Necklace saga. So a whole new arc begins. Rohan, a former Austrian ambassador, is trying to sleaze his way into Marie's good side, but sadly for him, she fucking hates this guy. He has a bad rep for messing around with prostitutes, and we all know her opinion on commoners and prostitution, and she does not like the fact he is a religious figure. Rohan plots with Jean to try and win Marie's favor. Oscar is pretty sad about Fearson leaving, so she heads to the beachside manor with Andre and Rosalie. While riding their horses, they come across Jean, who does her best to try and bribe Oscar, but gets rejected since Oscar isn't the type of person to take bribes, right? Jean lies through her teeth to Roanne and says that she has accepted the bribe and that their plan to use Oscar to get to the queen has worked. And asked him for like 10,000 livres. So she asked for that money so she can meet with the queen and introduce him to her. But she obviously ends up keeping the gold bribe and everything for herself. All the money is pocketed to herself. She's just conning this man. She lies to Rohan and tells him that she's met the queen and forges a reply to a letter that he wrote to her and asks for $50,000 more under the guise of donating it to the queen. She also gets Rohan to recommend her husband Nicholas into the royal guard. Imagine having the gall to con rich people around this time and to extract so much money for them. Like, oh my gosh, this chick is hacking the system. You can't get mad at her. She was born poor. All she's known is poverty. And she saw an opportunity and she was like, yo, these people are dumb as a fucking rock. I just can't hate the hustle and grind. I can't hate the ambition. And I can't believe she's getting away with it too. Like, Roanne, under the false impression that the queen really likes him now, crashes the queen's ball and becomes super sussed out when the queen pretends to be sick as soon as she sees him. Jan lies her way through all of that by somehow convincing him that the queen wants to see him alone. So she hires a blind prostitute to pose as the queen and makes him think that the queen loved him and even forges more fake love letters to him. It's wild. Like, Oscar almost catches them in the act, but maybe next time. In episode 22, a jeweler approaches Marie and attempts to sell her an expensive-ass necklace, which she declines because she knows it's way too hefty of a price. There's a time skip again, and now Marie has given birth to her 2 kids. To spend more time with her kids, Marie moves to Petit Trianon. Is that? I'm sorry. I'm trying. A small village on the property of Versailles. She continues to ignore her queenly duties, and I have no idea what the heck Louis the 16th even does. He's depicted as kind of a dope, so maybe he doesn't really contribute that much. So, it's been 4 years since the jeweler was unable to sell his expensive ass necklace to Antoinette. So, he approaches Jean to help him sell it. Jean comes up with another idea to con Rohan. She convinces Rohan that Antoinette wants that necklace, and he falls for it like an idiot. Of course, Jean does something else with the necklace. She asks Nicholas to sell each piece of the diamond all around. Oscar goes to Trianon to ask the queen to restart the audiences, but is unable to once she sees the queen just hanging around with her kids and playing with them. Oscar and Marie chat a little bit. They end up discussing the Revolutionary War and how it's what ended, the one in America, right? And they wonder if Fearson made it back alive. Later, Oscar and Andre go to a pub where they get into a brawl with people simply because they're noble. Like regular folks, the quote unquote peasants, fucking hate nobles and they will beat down anybody that is a noble around them. So the jeweler sends a letter to Antoinette asking for payment, but she is unaware because she's like, I never fucking bought this, right? She's unaware of this payment that this guy's asking for, and so she burns the receipt. The jeweler gets desperate for payments and starts showing up to the palace grounds and to the private villa as many times, begging for Marie to just pay him an installment. But Marie hasn't the slightest clue, right? And so they kind of arrest the guy and they're like, the fuck do you want? And they end up tracking down Rohan, who is arrested for questioning from a casino. Rohan hands the love letters that he had received, but the king informs him that these love letters were incorrectly signed and they're more likely to be forged than anything. The king wants to forgive Rohan, but Marie is against it and wants Rohan, Jean, and Nicholas to be put on trial for trying to entrap her, to cause a conspiracy, to try and, bring her reputation down even more. Jean is trying to cover her tracks and attempts to murder the blind imposter, but can't bring herself to commit it and instead hands her money. As soon as she leaves the imposter's place, Jean is arrested.
thrown in jail awaiting her trial.
Nicholas is still selling the pieces of jewelry, so he hasn't been caught yet. Robespierre, on the other hand, is rallying folks again, and this diamond necklace case has the average French citizen angrier than before. The royalty are just tossing their tax dollars around for some overpriced shiny rocks.
Jean lies her way through the entire trial. Even the blind impostor is brought to the trial for her witness statement and confirms that Jean was the one who approached her. And so Jean finds herself in a really tough spot. How does she defend herself?
She's cornered, and so she starts blaming every single little thing on Marie.
The judge wants proof, and Jean points to how Marie burnt the receipt from the jeweler.
And then she tries saying that Marie is actually a lesbian. What? And tries claiming that all the women close to Marie are her lovers. Polignac, Oscar, she's just throwing all of these people under the bus. The people in the court are just eating this up. In 1786, everyone received their sentencing. The impostor and Rohan are the only ones found not guilty, and Nicholas is still on the run since he was the one selling the necklace pieces, right?
Jean gets branded as a thief in front of people as a public sentencing.
Commoners and nobles both line up outside of the prison. Episode 24. In this episode, she escapes and starts writing scandalous gossip about the queen. France is eating this up.
Jean makes hella money off the books that she sold, but she can't leave the monastery.
The masked man, so there was a masked man that had helped her escape, who might just be Duke Orleans, won't let her leave until she finishes all of the volumes of her series. There's 3, she's done 1, so she has 2 more books to write, and when she's done, then he'll let her go.
But yeah, Jean kind of gets depressed and becomes an alcoholic since she can't leave the monastery.
The masked man does rat on her once she finishes writing all her books. Oscar's regiment is sent over, but she enters the place alone.
Jean is a bit too drunk and she's run out of gas.
The desire to stay on the run is gone, and she just wants to die. She ends up stabbing Nicholas on the back, preventing him from strangling Oscar to death. And then she drags him to the cellar where they both commit a double suicide, exploding the building that they were in, killing both of them. Meanwhile, Polignac blackmails Rosalie to join her household, and if she doesn't, Polignac will try and frame Oscar to the diamond case, since Oscar's name was tossed during the trial, right?
Sadly, Rosalie leaves the manor before Oscar leaves to capture Jean.
She's confused as to why Rosalie is suddenly leaving, but chooses to respect her decision to move. In episode 25, Fersen returns to France after serving in the war and attempts to do some PR for Marie's growing bad reputation. Oscar gets a promotion, just a fancy title, and the flames of revolution are growing stronger in the streets of France. This episode is interesting because we get to see Oscar dressed up and dolled up like a woman. She finds herself constantly thinking of Fersen, and even attends the ball where she gets a chance to dance with him. During their time at the ball, Fersen is constantly praising Oscar, trying to figure out who this mysterious young foreign lady is, because this lady reminds him so much of Oscar. This is the one and only night of romance that she can think she can have, and she's glad that she experienced it, and she's trying to be like, this is the only time I'll get to be a woman. Now I gotta go back to living like a man. And Andre is jealous somewhere out there. He's jealous. Actually, more on Andre a little bit later. In episode 26, a Robin Hood-esque character referred to as the Black Knight is out in the streets, stealing from the wealthy to hand to the poor. I wish we had someone like this during these days, but all the nobles are losing their mind over it. During this time, Andre is out and about more, which leads Oscar to grow suspicious of him. Is he the Black Knight? She decides to try and catch the Black Knight red-handed and knows that he is more likely to strike at balls, so she attends as many balls as she can to catch him. She's able to track him down at one of the balls. Well, she's not able to track him down. He kind of jumps out in the open, jumps on the chandelier like a goofy, and jumps out the window. But anyway, she chases him. She ends up following him all the way to Duke Orleans Manor. She gets away from the scene, but passes out on the streets where she's rescued by a family who found her injured. To Oscar's surprise, Rosalie is living with this family. We find out that Polignac definitely was scheming something. Since her younger daughter had killed herself, she decided to fix Rosalie's marriage to that old guy from before. And Rosalie was like, fuck that, and ran away. Oscar offers Rosalie to return back to the manor with her, but she declines since Rosalie has grown to hate the nobles and prefers to live her life out here in the city that she's always known. Paris, in a lifestyle that she's more comfortable with. Once Oscar makes her way back to the manor, she confronts Andre about being the Black Knight. He insists that he's been going to the church to hear the speeches about a new age and takes Oscar to one of the sessions. We get to learn that Andre definitely is for the revolution. And since Oscar is hell-bent on finding the Black Knight, Andre volunteers to dress up as the Black Knight to try and lure out the actual one. During this time, they steal stuff like the real one too, which is kind of funny. But well, Oscar supervises him from far, and one day the two end up coming across the real deal. And this Black Knight ends up slashing one of Andre's eyes. The knight makes a run for it while Oscar helps Andre. The doctor tells him to keep the bandages over his eye until it is healed to avoid blindness, which he doesn't really follow through at all. Oscar decides to investigate Duke Orleans, but is instead taken to a salon that the Duke hosts where young people get together and just hang around and talk and do intellectual stuff, right? And Oscar checks it out of curiosity. What she doesn't realize is that she's being observed from an event by the Black Knight, who decides to take Oscar hostage since her dad is the one in charge of the Royal Guard's military weapons. And the knight and his people need some. She gets lured down to the cellar and then eventually yeeted into a room. The knight was hoping to be able to get some sort of ransom note out of Oscar, but she doesn't oblige at all. When Oscar doesn't return home, Andre gets worried and decides to head out to look for her. They break out, and Oscar is able to capture the knight by shooting his shoulder. The Black Knight turns out to be Bernard. Oscar ends up providing medical aid to Bernard and lets him rest at her manor for a little bit. She doesn't turn him in, mainly because of Andre. Andre's left eye goes blind because he took off his bandage when he became the Black Knight to go rescue Oscar, right? And this pisses off Oscar. Blinded by rage, Oscar tries to blind Bernard's eye too while he's passed out, but stops since she can't bring herself to do it. And Andre reminds Oscar how the people were starving and he can't find himself to hate Bernard's action and supports his movement and what he did for the people instead, because he's a commoner too, right? He's a servant boy, so he is for the people because he is the people. So Oscar decides to lie to her father about capturing the wrong guy and lets Bernard go after hearing Andre out. All right, before we continue, I want to mention how Andre isn't that bad of a guy. I was actually pretty neutral about him. I didn't have any opinion. I thought he was a fun dude. Okay. It was kind of obvious at this point that, Andre might be Oscar's love interest. I wasn't quite sure. Maybe Rosalie and Oscar could end up together. Who knows? Maybe it won't be one-sided. Who knows? But I didn't really have an opinion of him, but episode 28 is where I got a little from Andre. So, warning about Andre being a little this episode. Andre is beginning to have very blurry vision. His only good eye is now starting to fuck up as well. And this is stressing him out. He might go blind now. Well, one of the eyes, the left eye, is already blind. So his right eye, the only good eye, might also start losing vision. So he might completely go blind, which is stressing him out. But in this episode, Fierson visits Oscar and confronts her about being the woman from the ball. And they have a moment. He can't return her feelings for him, and she runs away sobbing. They choose to part ways and never meet each other, and she wishes for him to be able to find love someday. Andre, like I said, is losing more of his vision, and he's getting more stressed and more paranoid, and this keeps building on in this episode. Oscar quits the Royal Guard because she wants to do riskier jobs, and she's also kind of trying to run away from her rejection from Fierson. So she's coping, and her way to cope is to say that she wants to completely live as a man and, commit her life to riskier jobs and being, ooh, I'm such a man, and being tough. But yeah, so she's quitting the Royal Guard and she wants to live on her own and be independent. And all of this information is a little too much for Andre. He knows he will never see Oscar again if he becomes blind. And so he first he tells Oscar that a woman will always be a woman, or you'll always be a woman in my eyes, or something like that. And she slaps him and he assaults her, forcefully kissing her and ripping her shirt off before kind of pulling his shit together and realizing what he's doing. He apologizes and then he confesses his love to her.
What was that?
What the hell was that? But a couple of things happen in this next episode. Oscar is appointed as commander of the French Guard Company B, a regiment filled with commoners. She tells Andre that she does not hold a grudge for what happened between them the other night, but she doesn't really want to see him because she doesn't love him back. So she's keeping a distance between the two. The company that she is set to join doesn't approve of her because she's a noblewoman. And Andre, through this guy that he meets at a bar named Alan, ends up joining Company B as well to keep an eye and protect Oscar. She challenges one of the troops to a duel to determine whether she gets in the company or not. She wins and gets approved to join as their commander, but that doesn't necessarily mean that her company has approved her. Like, they don't approve her of being their commander, so they're gonna be a little rebellious with her. Behind Oscar's back, Oscar's father has agreed to a marriage proposal from General Girardelli, Mr. Girardelli here. Remember him from the very beginning, who dueled with Oscar to get the Royal Guard position. He was also in her team, so we got to see his cameo here and there. He wants to get married to Oscar because he's got a big fat crush on her. And he missed her smile and her laughter and her voice because now that she's gone, he's like, oh my God, I miss her. It must be love. In episode 30, we get to see Louis St. Just. He's on a wild killing spree. And this is kind of a problem because he eventually does later this episode come for Oscar's dad. But that's a little later. For now, Alan informs Andre that he is now widely known to be Oscar's servant. So everybody knows what Andre and Oscar's connection is, and that Andre should watch his back because the people in Company B might just jump him. Oscar is being given a tough time by Company B since none of them listen to her orders, and so she knows she's going to have to like really work hard to get them on her team. So when she goes home, she finds out that her father has kind of done this marriage proposal, and she asks her father to refuse the proposal, and he begins to cry, feeling as if he had caused her so much pain by raising her as a man. I'm sorry, dude, but I feel like it's a little too late. But Oscar lets her father know that she was glad that she was raised as a boy because she feels as if he taught her to be strong. But yeah, Oscar's dad is shot by St. Just, and look at him fucking go. Like, him jumping into the water took me out. It shouldn't be that funny, but it really was. And I realized that this shit is too serious now. And that I needed funny moments like this since the last 10 episodes are creeping up and it'll get chaotic pretty quick. By the end of that episode, her father stops pestering to get her married. Episode 31. The riots begin. People are stealing bread, jewelry, whatever. Chaos is spreading throughout Petty. Oscar finds out that one of her men had pawned off his government-issued rifle in order to make some money. It's illegal, so the guy is arrested and sentenced to death. Alan is pissed that Oscar allowed this to happen and slaps her before she can even respond. Then he challenges her to a duel. Oscar denies approving her own soldier from being taken by the military police, and the two begin the fight. Rain pours as the two draw their swords. They take their stances and begin. Oscar struggles against this talented swordsman. He disarms her, but not before she cuts him, winning the duel. Ellen begs Oscar to help their squad mate. He explains how everyone in their company has sold their guns or the military uniform to feed their families. Oscar understands and tries her best to change the general's mind, encouraging him to pardon the man who pawned his rifle. This time, she's successful. Later, Oscar and Andre go to Paris to thank the general, but are attacked by people since Oscar is a noble and they're traveling in a noble carriage right now, like a bunch of dinguses. Like, why would you do that? And especially since right now, people do not fuck with nobles. Farrison, who is now the army colonel, is sent to stop the riots. He arrives on scene and notices Oscar, yanking her away from the mob, but he can't find Andre. Why the heck was he made colonel? She begs Farrison to save my Andre, shocking herself with her choice of words. Even shocking Farrison, who promises to find her Andre. Even shocking me. Girl, how? Like, I know Andre liked you, but you were avoiding him like the plague just a few days ago. How? Like, I wish they had poured more effort into, even monologue maybe, into showing how she was slowly falling for Andre, you know? But whatever. Fairson distracts the mob from Andre and saves his life. Oscar starts realizing that she still cares for Fairson, but doesn't love him anymore, and is magically in love with Andre. Okay, I'll stop being a hater. Let's continue. Everyone in Company B is concerned because Alan hasn't come back from his leave, so Oscar and Andre go to his home to deliver his pay. Once they arrive there, they find the rotting body of his sister on his bed. She had been engaged to a poor noble who abandoned her in favor of a rich lady, causing her to commit suicide. That loud, bright, obnoxious energy from Alan is gone, and he is emo. He just wanted his sister to be happy, and because it was a noble that caused his sister to just take her own life, he hates nobles more than anything. And he contemplates returning to the French Guard, but for now, he's not. He needs more time to recover. The people begin demanding for the Estates General. The Estates General is an assembly of the different classes in France, the clergy, nobility, and the commoners. And it's usually called and dismissed by the king. And people didn't really have much power in these meetings, but they could openly discuss their worries. That's what they're trying to get the king to do. Bernard holds a rally gathering everyone to desire equal footing and representation amongst nobles. And oh, hey, there's Andre. After the rally, Bernard reveals to Andre that he and Rosalie are happily married and working for Robespierre. Bernard asks Andre to join him in their cause, but Andre refuses. People are finally getting fucking fed up of nobles, high taxes, and being treated like shit. Under public pressure, the king finally agrees to the Estate General for the first time in several centuries. Meanwhile, Oscar begins to suspect something is wrong with Andre's eye when she tosses a bottle at him to discard and he fails to catch it. She later holds up a dagger right in front of him, and he has kind of a late reaction. Oscar ends up coughing blood during her patrol. The delegates cooperate with some nobles and clergy to form the National Assembly. The king denies the delegates entry to the assembly due to their high rising number of victories. Oscar is ordered against her will to seal the doors, and the delegates move to the tennis court, where the tennis court oath is made, marking the start of the French Revolution. The king reopens the doors to resolve the situation, but the delegates are only allowed through the back doors, which they refuse to go through. It's raining like crazy, and they're only calling the names of nobles. So Oscar opens the front doors against the colonel's orders, allowing the delegates into the hall. The king's henchmen, all his little posse, are trying to convince him to dissolve the National Assembly. People are not pleased with the king's decision, and Company B is being relieved of their duties of patrolling the assembly hall, with new orders to now remove all delegates from the hall by all means necessary, meaning you can shoot a bitch if you want. Oscar refuses and is arrested. 12 other soldiers, including Alan, who refused to take orders from a new commander, are arrested as well. Oscar escapes with the help of Andre once she learns that the royal guards will be sent to remove the delegates, and she rushes to stop them. Looky here, it's this guy, the guy that has a crush on Oscar and asked her hand for marriage. She basically dares him to shoot her if he wants to get to the hall and to stop everybody, right? But since he likes her and he respects her, he withdraws with his whole company. General Gerges is under pressure by his peers over Oscar's actions and decides to execute Oscar with his own hands and commit suicide afterwards. Back at the manor, he tells her to sit down. The two argue, and he's about to kill her when Andre intervenes. Andre and the general get into a dispute. General Gerges is angry, pissed off, and he decides he wants to kill both Oscar and Andre when he's interrupted by a pardon from the queen. Great for Oscar, but not so much for the 12 soldiers, who are being sentenced to death without even being called to a trial. So Oscar goes undercover to Bernard, requesting him to somehow rally up at least 3,000 people, promising to keep the people safe if they rally and demand for the people in the prison to be freed. She also promises him that she'll be his errand girl for life if anybody gets injured during the rally and if the rally turns into a riot. She orders the rest of the Company B to guard the rally. And then this little menace shows up, Saint Just, who tries to start shit. He wants to turn the rally into a riot by killing Oscar because the people would be more angry and will be more against authority if Oscar dies. The two break free from the crowd and end up dueling in the sewers. And his mask ends up breaking. I think she already had a feeling who you were, though, dude. Antoinette walks up to the meeting the king is having with his advisors and orders the men to be released since it's not worth turning Paris into a war zone for only 12 men. In episode 36, Robespierre persuades Finance Minister Jacques Necker to talk to the king into approving the assembly, knowing that this was the only way to avoid bloodshed. Antoinette orders 10,000, no, sorry, correction, 100,000 soldiers from every part of France to suppress the revolutionaries and tells Oscar that she might have to join them soon. Oscar's illness is getting worse, and she realizes that there's a problem with her lungs. She begins to model for a portrait of herself, coughing up blood, lung problems, getting a portrait of yourself made. We might be seeing something tragic happening to Oscar, methinks. Due to the large number of soldiers, Paris is plunged back into a food shortage because there's more mouths to feed and there's not enough food, right? Necker tries to persuade the king to approve the assembly while Antoinette tries otherwise. Robespierre denies Saint Just's request to assassinate the royal family and sends Bernard to keep him in line. Antoinette banishes Necker from Versailles, and Robespierre uses this as propaganda for the people to take up arms against the royal family, spreading lies that a massacre is about to occur. Oscar begs Antoinette to withdraw army from Paris, but she refuses. Antoinette, in turn, asks if she would protect her if the revolution came, and Oscar responds by saying that she is no longer in the royal guards. Oscar leaves Antoinette in silent tears, knowing that they would never see each other again. In episode 37, it is 1789. Bernard writes the lies Robespierre wants, spreading chaos throughout the streets of Paris. Oscar discovers that she has TB. Since the only known cure at this time was good rest and in a nice area, her doctor tells her to quit the military and to just move to the countryside, or she would die in 6 months. And she also finds out that Andre is going blind, thanks to the doctor who spills the tea without realizing. In the streets, blacksmiths are forging more weapons and bakers are selling them. Civilians begin raiding for food and firearms. Meanwhile, Oscar's portrait is finished, but Andre cannot see it. He keeps saying things and describing things that aren't really in the painting, causing Oscar to break into tears. All this Goofy had to do was not remove the bandage from his eye, but I get it. He wanted to rescue Oscar and disguised himself as the Black Knight, but still. Company B is ordered to suppress a riot. On the way, Oscar and Andre are attacked by rioters, but they escape, and they lay low since rioters are everywhere. That night, Oscar confronts Andre about his blindness. She tries to send him back to the mansion, but he says that he will always be by her side. They have a moment, she confesses her love for him, and he says some corny ass shit, and they kiss and make love under the stars. Oscar's dad has a breakdown after reading her goodbye letter to him. Clearly, at this point, it's obvious that she left the portrait behind in the manor for him to remember her by. In episode 38, Company B is summoned to subdue the protest at the square, the Tuileries. I'm so sorry for butchering that, but it's a square in Paris. But the company decide that they will fight with the civilians under Oscar's command if a riot breaks out. A child is killed by a soldier of the German cavalry regiment, causing chaos. Many civilians are killed due to the lack of organization and formation, which ends up causing them to eventually retreat from the battle because they don't really know how to stay in formation. Oscar shows up with a former Company B because they decided to abandon their post and to help people. People are still cautious of them, and so Oscar walks into the crowd, pleading with everyone to trust her squad and that she'll gladly eat a bullet to prove herself. Bernard pops out of nowhere and vouches for her. During this battle, Andre becomes completely blind. Company B is ambushed by a completely different regiment and ends up losing half their members. The rest of them go into hiding, while others try to retreat back to the square. While trying to retreat back to the square, Oscar and a soldier notice each other and shoot at each other. Fortunately, the soldier misses his shot, but unfortunately, Andre is shot in the chest and is bleeding out. Everyone rushes past all the firing soldiers to try and get Andre to some sort of doctor. 10 doctors step up to try and help him, but his time is up. He is doing his best to cling on to life, but despite his strong willpower, He dies smiling and crying tears. Despair and sorrow take over Oscar, and she asks Alan to lead the group for her. She's worried that she's not in the right state of mind to be able to lead them anymore, because she just lost Andre. He declines and tells her that everyone else is grieving his loss too, and that she needs to see this through. They join the civilian army in the morning to storm the infamous Bastille prison. Despite the small amount of people in the prison, its cannons are doing some serious damage to the civilian side. Thousands are dying. They're having a really hard time making any sort of breakthrough. The civilian army is unable to fire their own cannons because none of them really know how to use it. So Oscar steps up and takes command of the cannons. She's so badass in this scene. She's so badass in general. But yeah, they cause a lot of damage to the walls of the prison. The riflemen on top of the prison start targeting Oscar because it's obvious that she's leading the charge. And so they shoot her down. Final episode. Sadly, Oscar does not survive this. There is no anime style. She takes a bajillion bullets and stands up and fights. She does not make it. So her final request for the former Company B, so everybody in her remaining squad, to just keep fighting, keep firing the cannons, to keep firing and fighting to try and seize the prison and to not give up. And the show says the date of Oscar's death is July 14th, 1789. An hour later, the prison surrenders. There's a time skip. So 5 years later, Rosalie and Bernard visit Alan at his farm, and they chat about what happened during the revolution and how, well, people were being executed. France has been declared a republic. Robespierre, Saint Just, along with obviously the king and the queen and many other nobles, are executed. And Fersen, he returned back to Sweden, but he became cold-hearted, so his own citizens killed him. Bernard starts writing a book about the French Revolution, and Oscar and Andre were buried together on in a small hill in Arras. The morning of Antoinette's execution, she had given Rosalie a paper flower, and she told her to color it in Oscar's favorite color. And Alan says that he doesn't really know what Oscar's favorite color is, but he knows that Andre would have said white. And with that, the show ends. This was so long. There was so much going on. I actually butchered a huge chunk of the story, but I did my best. I think I butchered off Dewberry and Antoinette's cat fight so that this video wasn't too long. And I tried including as much details as I could without over explaining stuff. But yeah, it was a long watch. I binged it in 4 days. Yeah, it was a lot to watch. I wouldn't recommend anyone to binge this show. Lady Oscar is kind of tough to binge, just because the momentum. There are some arcs that are more dense than others. The first 10 episodes are very silly, but I can see why they were done the way they were. It's to show how childish Marie Antoinette was, and it's to get you more familiar with the royals, their pettiness, how they waste money, how they just are living a very lavish life, so that slowly, when you would get to the commoners, how average people were living in France, you would feel for them. I feel like that's why they did that. But I like that shift. I like that towards the end of the show, you got little to no screen time from Marie. I liked that. It was more down to earth. I like that. Some people didn't, but I did. Yeah, it's over the top sometimes, but I genuinely don't have a problem with that. I think it adds more flavor to it. It makes it more entertaining. And there were moments where Lady Oscar was very serious. And the little goofy moments made it much more easy to digest because, like I said, I wouldn't recommend binging this because it's a lot to digest. There's a lot happening. Overall, it was a very enjoyable watch. I really enjoyed it. If I had to pick between Dear Brother and this anime, I did enjoy Dear Brother a little bit more just because of the theatrics, just because of crazy characters like Mariko, just because of the soap opera drama to the next level. It was fun, but I can see why there's a lot of hype around the show. And I'm really excited to see how the movie will be because, there's a movie coming out and it's being animated by Mappa. So I'm kind of excited for it, and I'm really glad I watched it before it comes out. It comes out in January, so hey, hey, not that far away. There were some people in my comment section that confused me and made me think as if this was the same type of shit as Dear Brother. So I wasn't expecting Oscar to reject Rosalie. So yeah, I was kind of confused. And then I realized that they were trying to say that Oscar and Andre are reminiscent of how a lot of shonen I love stories are written. And I was like, oh, I did not. Oh. I really liked that this like one of my favorite things that I liked is that this show focuses not only on gender identity, class differences, French Revolution, but it also has like so many other characters and their hardships shown and how they deal with it and what happens to them. Some have happy endings, some have tragic endings. So it was nice to get a slice of everything. I have some notes that I wrote down. Let's yap about her romantic interests. So let's start with Rosalie, then Fierson, and Andre. I know some people were mentioning Marie, but I didn't see it. So I didn't see it. From my perspective, I thought it was admiration. Rosalie, cute crush, one-sided love, and kind of forgotten after Revenge era. We don't get that much screen time with Rosalie, and that's fine. I understand that there's not much happening with her, but I would have loved to see on screen her running away from Polignac's house because that was wild. I was so happy seeing their moments together. It was so cute, and I felt baited. Oscar didn't even give her a chance. Next, Fearson. Anyway, Fearson. So I feel like her crush for him kind of appeared out of nowhere. But then I realized while I was like noting and jotting down notes and like looking through my notes for the recap, I realized he kind of had saved her life a couple of times. So it wouldn't surprise me if she started feeling a little conflicted about her emotions for him. And they did start, like, whenever he would come from Sweden, he did hang out with her and Andre a lot. So it makes sense that she slowly started feeling something for him. I mean, she got dolled up for him. And I do think that it's a good thing that she didn't end up with him because he seemed to only notice her when she got dolled up. Andre, I've already mentioned how I felt pretty neutral about him. And episode 28 kind of made it very, I didn't know how to feel about him after that episode. They didn't need to do that. They could have toned it down for my sake. Yeah, but like the first thing I thought when Andre did that, like, and then he confessed his love for her, I was like, Andre's the type of guy to say, "Don't break up with me, or I'll kill myself." I had a hard time, like, I had a hard time connecting with Andre after that. I just could not stop making memes about him in my head. So yeah, he always had a thing for her. The only bone I have to pick with the Andre is not even Andre. Well, it is episode 28, but other than that is I wish we would have gotten monologues, something to indicate that Oscar was starting to like Andre before she just blurted out, "My Andre." Well written characters, in my opinion. John, Jan, Jean, however you say her name, Jeannie. I think she's amazing. She's driven, ambitious, strong willed. She's a survivor. Anything to get her money up. She is flawed, but there's nothing wrong with that. I like that she was out to get her bag. She just did not want to live a shitty, poor life. And she knew that jobs were not available because job hunting was hard. Rosalie was struggling to get a job. So she was like, fuck it. I'm gonna con everybody and get up there. It sucks that she, eventually became an alcoholic and got really depressed and all this other stuff, but I think she was a well written character. And then there's Oscar. Though her thought process isn't always well written, for example, her falling in love with Andre out of nowhere, her desire to join the revolution was kind of always slowly being planted pretty early on. Episode, what was it, 7? or 8, somewhere around that, is her first interaction where that little kid got shot in the street by by Duke Gunning Kids Down. Her anger and her disdain for nobility and her eventually joining the revolution made a lot of sense to me because we start seeing that pretty early on. It's just there's a short moment where they take a break from it so you don't see it, but just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's brewing up in her head. So we do get to see her slowly getting mad at people around her that are noble, that aren't paying attention to the pain of people um living a much lesser life than them. So I really like that about her. I feel like this character was very relatable to me. I don't have gender identity problems, not anymore. I'm not non-binary. I feel like if you're non-binary, you can relate to this character. But I will speak on like when I was a tomboy. Yeah, as a tomboy, though my parents never raised me as a boy, and they never like were like, we prefer a boy. They never did that. It's just me. I restricted myself to being very tomboyish. I don't know why. And I rejected feminine things, which is funny because I look pretty girly now. I did not. I was a tomboy for a really long time. Like the first time I wore a dress, my dad was like, "Oh my god." He was like to my mom, he's like, "She's wearing a dress." And I was like, "Bro, I can hear you." But yeah, like it was a big deal. So, Oscar I feel like is really well written character. She struggles with like which life is better, which life would be more fulfilling to her, and if one, living life as one thing has more advantages than the other. And it's interesting to see what she perceives as being a man. She thinks being a man is like being in constant face of danger, which isn't true. But it's interesting to see her thought process and how her dad kind of like instilled a lot of those ideas in her head. I don't have a grand analysis for this show. It was fun to watch. I thought it was just a fun watch, and I don't have like crazy conspiracies or some sort of video essay to give you. This is just a recap fun video, right? So overall viewing experience was fun, enjoyed it. I can see the what do you call it? The hype around it and why this is considered classic. It is very interesting. It's a lot of fun. The opening song is such a bop. I loved it. And I found myself very interested in Oscar's life and what she did. She was really cool. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for recommending me to go out and watch this show. And thanks for watching my dumb, dorky, really long video. I am so sorry, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.